Well, thank you very much. We've heard about the US today, we've heard about the EU, and now we're going to hear about Wales. Wales is tiny, but you're here, so you're going to have to hear about us today. I'm not a lawyer, so you're not going to get a law talk from me. I'm still learning I've learned a lot today, actually, about some of the details on the new law. I'm not a practitioner either, actually. I'm a policy person. I've worked in procurement policy for years. But I have to engage with practitioners on a daily basis to make sure we develop the right policy. So I'll give a little bit of Welsh context to begin with, just so that you can see the background to this. And then I'm going to sort of ask you to put yourself in the position of a procurement practitioner and try and see what the different pressures are that are facing you. And then, with all those pressures, how do we find the right balance in an individual procurement? I'll then talk just for a couple of minutes about some of the policies that we've developed in Wales, and maybe touch at the end a little bit on this burden of proof thing, but other speakers have touched on that already as well this afternoon. So then the Welsh context is that we have around about 1 in 20 of the UK's population here, and yet our output, our workplace output per head, is around 3/4 of the UK average. We, as at the last count, award 52% of our public contracts to Wales-based suppliers. That's compared with, I think they say, 99% in Germany, 99% in France, 98% in the UK, and 58% or so in Scotland. But that sounds like different to the figures that you were talking about earlier on. And I think that proves a point, actually, is that these figures are very hard to come by, and they're measured in different ways. It depends whether you're looking at numbers of contracts, it depends if you're looking at accounts payable data, or if you look at, at contract awards and stuff. It's really difficult to compare like with like, and yet our politicians, certainly in Wales, really focus in on this particular figure. That's the all-important figure for them. So a bit then about the Welsh public sector then. We have our government plus some sponsored bodies, 7 health boards, 3 All Wales Health Trusts, 22 local authorities, 4 police and 3 fire, anyway, you can read it there. Lots and lots of quite small public bodies. But it's nice working in Wales. I used to work in the Treasury. In Wales, we know each other. We know who all the main procurement people are in all these organisations, and we can actually work together and build systems and things which everybody can implement, and then we can measure and track the impact that's having. So I really enjoy working in Value Wales for that reason, I think. What we have in terms of the procurement landscape then, we have our little Value Wales unit in the Welsh Government, which kind of sets the policy. We've also got a brand new National Procurement Service, which is handling common and repetitive spend across the public sector. We have, within the NHS itself, looking at the whole of the NHS expenditure, a shared services partnership, and a number of regional and sectoral consortia that deal with spend that isn't covered by the National Procurement Service. So that's kind of how the landscape looks. So here is my procurement person, scratching his head probably there in the middle, trying to work out what to do on an individual procurement. And I hope you can read that. I'm afraid I should have not put white on blue there. The first big question then is, do we pile it high and buy it cheap? Or do we worry about maximising the impact, the economic benefit? To a certain extent, we can achieve both, but actually they do kind of pull in opposite directions to some extent. Another challenge then is within organisations and also across the public sector, do we centralise and control operations to make sure we're doing things absolutely right? Or do we devolve our activities close to the business areas so we can make sure that we're actually buying exactly the right stuff? Then do we delve into the absolute minutiae of details of each of our suppliers' performances and activities to manage our reputational risk and make sure we don't end up in the local paper? Or do we focus on being proportional and efficient in our procurement activities? Do we specify in great detail to make sure if we specify clearly, we'll get the best responses? Or do we say, this is what we want to achieve, and you tell us how you're going to deliver it? Do we promote partnering with our suppliers, build up great relationships that will carry us through and make sure that we can achieve efficiencies and improvements as we go along? But also we've got to worry about maintaining our exit routes and competition in the market. What is our partnering relationship doing to competition out there in the market? And of course, there's a link there between piling it high and buying it cheap and the impact that we might have on markets. So if you're in the middle of all this, it's quite confusing. It's quite difficult. And actually, that's what makes procurement so interesting, makes it such a great discipline. And that is a challenge. And so delving into an awful lot of the details that we need to do on these social aspects of procurement, it's very time consuming. And actually, we've already got all of these things to worry about as well. So how do we find the right balance in those situations? And I say it really boils down to two things that we have to do. First of all, we've got to really clearly understand our requirements. This is not new to any of you, of course. And we've clearly got to understand our market. So we need to be able to forecast our demand, understand it and how it's going to change. We've got to have a really clear understanding of our current costs, particularly on services. A lot of our large service contracts fall down because we didn't really understand what it was we were doing before we outsourced it. We need to work with our service managers and customers to find out what really matters to them, customer service and the service delivery. We've got to understand our organisational policies and what drives the organisation. We've got to clearly understand our own risks and how we can manage those alongside our suppliers. And on the market side, of course, we've got to understand what the market's like now, what the competitiveness in the market is and entry barriers, who's likely to bid. Might what we're doing now actually alter the shape of the market, and what are the risks? So the decision on a particular market might be the right one for now, but next time we compete it, we're back to the drawing board because the demand, our demand and the markets might have changed. And really the answer, of course, as practitioners, we know we have to engage in a lot of stakeholder engagement, really do a lot of work before we initiate a procurement. And what this also means is that an inflexible sort of one-size-fits-all approach to policy doesn't work. It rarely works. And in Wales, we've tried not to do that. When we've developed policy, we haven't produced a document, say, throw it over the wall, you must all implement this. We've tried to develop things that are flexible. And of course, the Welsh Government at the moment has no legislative powers at all for procurement. So, what can we do in Wales if we're, just in the same, same legal environment as everybody else? Well, the reality is we don't let that bother us. We get on and develop new policies and we make them work. And the way we do that is that we actually try to develop our policies collaboratively. And I hope my other public sector colleagues around the room would support that. We do try not to say, sit in our ivory towers with the doors closed and come up with some great idea, but actually to go out and test those ideas and develop things together. Then we do an awful lot of piloting before we implement things, before we fully implement them. We train as many practitioners as possible and get feedback during that training on how we can improve things. Then, only after we've done all that, do we enshrine in a formal policy statement, and we have one of those, the Welsh Public Policy Statement, Procurement Policy Statements, sorry, too many P's. Having done that, we then seek formal adoption of those policies, and then we monitor the uptake, we review them, and we hopefully improve them as we go forward. So that's actually how we do policy in Wales, even though we haven't got our own opportunity to make law. So I just want to talk very quickly about two things then that we have made in Wales and have really taken off and I think are being used elsewhere outside Wales as well. We have our community benefits clauses in our contracts, and we've been doing this for a while now. And these clauses include those in relation to employment and training, supply chain opportunities, engagement with third sector and supported businesses, and stuff around fair payment as well. And I guess what we need to think about here is, if we're talking about a contract, is it an infrastructure contract, or is it actually, do we think of it more in terms of a regeneration contract? So when we're building a bridge or something, or a school even, is that it? How do we define that? And the way you define it then influences what then becomes part of the subject matter of the contract. So we've rolled this out now for several years, and it's actually the community benefits programme is big in Wales, and it's been adopted on all of our major infrastructure projects and across every public sector body in Wales. So having produced guidance and done training now, adoption of that policy is expected. And so through governance and improving the governance of that as well, we've done recently too, and making these conditions of grant funding. To monitor how that's actually working, because of course measuring things is the way to make them actually happen. We have our own measurement tool as well. And the result are that of the 27 projects that have been measured so far, which is around 80 in total, that's delivered £346 million of investment in Wales, more than 13,000 training weeks to more than 500 disadvantaged people. So it is making a big difference. And actually, nobody argues with it. I mean, maybe we could be challenged, but it's everybody wins. It's not something, I mean, maybe we pay a bit more for the reasons that we described earlier on. You know, we could just say, well, we're going to do training and all these things outside of procurement, but then, you know, they get measured they get paid for in a different way and accounted for in different ways. And actually, sometimes doing training and these sorts of things alongside a contract is good, because it's a real life environment, isn't it, to be trained in, and you know, it's good for the people who are receiving that training. So that's community benefits, and you may want to ask me a bit more, and there are others in the room who know more about that programme than I do. The one that I know much more about is the SQUID, Supplier Qualification Information Database. And this is our approach to solving that problem that of selection stage that suppliers really complain about, always being asked for too many questions in slightly different ways, and spending an awful lot of time on this particular part of the procurement process, which doesn't really add a lot of value. You're not at the end of the day looking at the things you actually want, which is, you know, what it is you're getting and how much it's costing, and yet we seem to spend a disproportionate amount of time on this stage. So I'm all in favour of keeping it simple, and you know, I think the law kind of is going along with that, helpfully, I think. So our approach then is, you know, we thought, how can we both, suppliers want it to be more simple but also more standard, standardised but also flexible, and of course that's a difficult one. So what we decided to do in Wales is come up with a standardised list of questions, but have a flexible approach for choosing the ones that are most suitable for each procurement. So it's aimed to keep workload to a minimum, and to be sort of SME friendly as well, and the whole business of collecting information for suppliers and storing it and just using it once, which is again another, you know, we're ahead of the game really in what's being proposed across the EU. So it just deals with common core questions, and there's the flexibility for buyers then to include ones that are specific to the contract for shortlisting. The system includes a risk-based tool which we've developed, which helps buyers to start from a blank sheet of paper and answer a series of questions about their procurement and come up with a question set which is most suitable for that particular procurement, which is then, you can then tailor it. So we're not forcing people to adopt exactly the question set that comes out. You can say, actually, for my own reasons, I don't want that one, I want to include that one. So it is flexible, and it still allows the buyer to do their own thing. So how do we tackle social issues as part of that? Well, basically, we have avoided asking for policies and statements of intent, because we think that they're largely about ticks in boxes and nobody really reads them and assesses them. We've asked more questions that have yes, no answers or clear numbers, that we can be clear about thresholds that we're asking to enable suppliers to self-deselect from unsuitable contracts. So on these sort of social issues, I think generally when we're talking around Wales, we encourage those issues to be concentrated on at all the other stages of procurement and not at the selection stage. So specification, award, and then clearly through contract management as well. So now we've trained, in terms of this programme, we've trained over 500 users over 18 months in a consultation period, and these systems are now being built into our e-procurement process because they're already in use. I'm not going to talk about this. There's another piece of work we've just finished on consortium bidding. Faced with the problem that we've got lots of small firms and quite big contracts. One answer to that is promote consortium bidding for contracts. There are a few examples of that happening in practice. So we've produced a guide for both the buy and supply side on actually a practical guide on dealing with some of the risks and pitfalls there. I won't talk about blacklisting because I'm running out of time, I can see. But at the end of the day, when it comes to these social issues, and I haven't really touched on this too much earlier in my presentation, I planned to, but I haven't really. I guess what the point I wanted to get across today is that when you are a procurement officer working on a contract, you don't have the time to be travelling to the Far East to check out on, you know, manufacturing processes. It'd be nice if you could travel about, but you know, there isn't the time. So you really do. There is a limit to how much you can look at these things, and things like labelling and stuff are really helpful in that respect. I guess that's really all I wanted to say, so I won't carry on much longer than that. So I guess the question at the end of the day is this a lost opportunity or a new dawn? I think probably in Wales, we'll carry on with the good work. It gives us a bit of clarification. It supports some of the things we've already been doing. I suspect it won't make an enormous amount of difference to the way that we'll operate. I might be wrong there. I might be speaking out of turn, but I think we've been doing a lot of stuff that's found its way into the new directives already in Wales.
Thank you.